morning, everybody. On behalf of everyone, welcome. My name is Dan Spitzer from Hudson Roth. I'm pleased to be here. A couple of years ago, I hosted at the Agrion Conference a panel on energy efficiency financing. And at the end of the panel, I said, we'll really know we'll have made it in energy efficiency financing when the average person can walk into a bank or finance company and get a loan for energy efficiency financing the same way they can for a car. Now, we're not quite there yet, but we really have come a long way. And I'm very pleased because we have a panel this morning that's really among the leaders in making that happen in all phases of the industry, moving that forward. What I'm going to ask is I'm going to ask each of the panel members to introduce themselves, give some background on your background, what you do, your involvement in the industry for a few minutes. And then after we do that, before we start the main discussion, I'm going to ask each of you just to introduce yourselves and the company or entity that you represent. And then we'll get started with some questions. Barry, would you kick us off?
Hi, Barry Poland, Barry Capital. We're a specialty finance company that specializes in financing energy efficiency projects on a standalone basis and are known for doing unsecured financing, that is, without filing against the building so that we don't create secondary financing or default in the case of a senior mortgage.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ahmed Ibrahim. I'm with Ecosystem Energy Services. We specialize in the development of integrated energy performance projects based on deep building retrofits, driven dominantly for driving highest net present value. Our company is mostly engineering based, and we leverage the EPC model with lean construction to develop highest value for our clients.
Good morning, my name is John Dempsey. I work for Constellation Energy, and I handle our company's energy efficiency programs in New York. Principally, this is through two things. One is performance contracting, but also we have an energy efficiency financing tool that's integrated into your supply contract. So I manage that in New York. So it's principally doing energy efficiency projects with commercial industrial accounts and one Austin to the Gulf.
My name is Ramsey Stevens, and I'm with eCapital Development. We are a general energy efficiency consulting firm, but we're also an insurance brokerage, and we're one of the first insurance brokerages to exclusively dedicate ourselves to marketing and deploying energy performance insurance in order to provide more turnkey underwriting for financiers of projects, but then also to shorten the sales cycle and the origination process by being able to just market an investment-grade revenue outcome of a project instead of specific technology or specific development processes.
So if I can start with the gentleman to Ramsey's left, just go around and just introduce yourself and company or entity you're with.
Yeah, hi. My name is Navneet Trivedi. I'm from Accenture. I'm based in New York, and I'm part of the market practice at Accenture.
Nick Davis, I'm the director of Agrion Americas, and that's a good market.
Marlo Pinazzoli, we make investments in
Hanska Shaver from Associated Mutual, we're an energy efficiency carbon management company. We're just looking to pick up an asset.
Chrissy Haley, I work for JLL, a financial and professional services firm specializing in real estate, and I focus on energy and sustainability projects.
Laura Piccoli, I'm from McGrath Associates, and we do energy efficiency design and consulting.
Just keeping up, Tim Swan with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and we provide advisory evaluation of transactions for and around sort of energy-related projects.
Good morning, I'm Leah Sims with Enterprise Community Partners, focused on energy efficiency for multifamily affordable housing.
I'm Bahar Kizwani, the CEO of CSR Hub, one of Daniel's clients, and we provide access to sustainability metrics to corporations.
Philip Kelly, Riverside Generation, and we produce energy.
Yolan Stevenson, I teach environmental economics at Pratt Institute. I run the Green Tech Investors Forum, the monthly, second Friday of the month. Showcase one company that is in clean energy space. A growing number of energy efficiency companies.
My name is Jeff Baer. I'm managing director at Deutsche Bank, and I run our energy efficiency financing business at ASCAP.
My name is Lou Blaustein. I'm the president of a consulting firm called Lewis Brand Solutions, and we help brands that are greening tell their story more clearly, more powerfully, and I work with Barrett Corn and Barrett Capital.
My name is Harry Calabres, Woodland Energy Solutions, here on behalf of New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation.
Good morning, Posey Constable with New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation. We're a specialty finance firm founded by the city, but a not-for-profit involved with financing clean energy projects. We're building agnostic, we're technology agnostic. We'll do renewables, cogeneration, clean heat, and energy efficiency measures through the 5 boroughs of New York City.
I'm Phyllis Kessler, and I am an attorney, energy attorney with Twain Morris. And one of the areas that I work in is energy performance contracting.
I'm Jean Fox, I was a commissioner for 13 years with public utilities, just retired there. I'm still in the energy.
Hi, I'm Ellen Friedman. I'm a project finance attorney at Mason Peabody, and I'm very active in financing energy projects, including solar, and I'm interested in restructures of energy efficiency.
In the back,
I'm Jacob Luchanek from BI Capital. We do energy efficiency finance.
I'm Marianne Rothman with the Council of New York Cooperatives and Condominiums. It may look like I'm crashing a meeting like this, but I think I help get out the word of all the good opportunities that the rest of you provide, and try to put a little pressure on the banks that maybe we will reach that wonderful goal we have.
you know, I suspect a lot of people will be handing you their card today.
I'm Evan Berger with Calmac Manufacturing. We manufacture ice storage, thermal energy storage. We've got a dozen projects here in New York City and 4,000 worldwide.
Jillian Caramano with Agrion.
Amelia Barr with Agrion.
Oshin O'Brien with Agrion also.
Okay, if I didn't miss anybody, let's turn to our panel. Barry, I'm going to start with you. So during Superstorm Sandy, Co-op City stood out because the lights were on. Obviously, this is a group that has sort of a real look ahead at its management. You had an opportunity to work with them recently on a round of energy efficiency financing. Can you take us through some of the details, perhaps some of the challenges you faced, what you had to overcome? Some thoughts on that project?
Sure. Co-op City has their own, not cogen, but tri-gen plant, so they generate a lot. In Co-op City, for those who may not be familiar with it, is the largest cooperative in the world. Houses about 55,000 people and some 15,000 units, 35 buildings, and 8 garages. They also have a couple of commercial buildings, retail facilities. The 8 garages that serve all those buildings were using traditional fluorescent lighting. And a few years ago, before LED lighting reached prime time for diverse, broad-based dispersion of light exterior-wise, which is now feasible, but wasn't at that time when it was done. But induction lighting, which is an old line technology, but a very cost-effective technology, was effective. And so the garages had been rebuilt because of some other structural issues, and they decided to redo all the lighting. And it was about a $3 million project. They received a $1 million grant from CERTA, and there was about $2 million left to finance. And the problem, a number of problems, but the first problem was that they have a $600 million mortgage, and like a lot of the mortgages that I mentioned earlier, there was a prohibition against secondary financing. So the financing had to occur without creating a financing. And so the solution was a shared savings contract. So basically what that meant was that a company, it was a contractor, Green Energy Management, that undertook the responsibility for installing all of these lighting fixtures at their cost, guaranteed, in effect, self-insured the savings, and under the contract, they would share the savings with Co-op City. So if the savings were there, they got paid. Savings weren't there, they didn't get paid. So what Barrett Capital did when it came into the picture, our business model was to bring in an independent engineer to verify the savings. So one of the challenges with respect to that was that there was a maintenance facility in one building, there was a radio tower in another garage, so there's a high degree of visibility. But we were able to review the metrics and based on international protocols. Lighting wattage is pretty straightforward as to what, fluorescent light, how many watts is versus an incandescent or an LED type light. There were some LED lights that did go in there. And we were able to demonstrate those savings, get those savings to be accepted by Co-op City and to structure a transaction. Other complications had to do with the fact that because Co-op City is a limited equity type low-income, moderate-income housing, it needed to get various government approvals in addition to approvals of the board of directors. So that took a considerable amount of time. There were also some financial incentives that we provided, Barrett Capital provided to Co-op City to encourage them to go through all of this paperwork and time and effort to be able to do that. Having done that, we then funded the transaction, and knock wood, they're paying their bills, and they're very happy, and we're actually, there are some other projects that we're going to be working with them in other types of savings, other energy efficiency projects.
So, you're in the trenches with the intended beneficiaries of energy efficiency transactions. What kind of procurement mechanisms are you seeing that are proven favorable to commercial property owners? What methods are you going about in terms of pulling these transactions up together?
Well, when we speak about energy efficiency, to start, my background, just so everybody can understand, I've spent quite a few years in energy efficiency in the municipal world, Article 9 procurement projects, which are long-term contracts. And when you start working in the commercial sector, you realize that energy efficiency is a financial transaction, it's an investment, first of all. And when you start looking at projects for the commercial sector, clients are always looking for a high return on investment and net present value, and they're looking for a transaction that will drive the highest value. As a company, we started to realize that our approach, which was a lean construction method and integrating design and developing and securitizing the transaction. And when you do that, you allow your entire transaction for the client to drive the highest value. And simply put, when you have a project or an energy efficiency transaction that involves 3 or 4 different entities, each one of these entities by nature is going to have a net plus one safety in design, in construction, and monitoring and verification. That drives the cost of the entire transaction up, which in turn drives up the return on investment time, which in turn, when we bring it to financing, it becomes an 8-9 year transaction instead of potentially 4 or 5 years. Our business model is always based on integrating energy efficiency projects. Developing the design, being lean in construction and lean in that process transaction, and then only providing option C guarantees on our transaction, which for some of you may not understand. Option C is the highest level of M&B guarantees on the utility bill guarantee. So it's a financial guarantee on the actual reading of the facility or the building. So when you take that to the financing world, it's a much more desirable transaction as opposed to a traditional option A, which is the agreement on a document type guarantee, which doesn't really take into the performance of the project. Just a quick case in point, one of our clients here in New York City was a hospital, and again, some of you, as much as all of you would know, hospitals are very hard to finance, very limited on cash flow, and they're a 24/7 operation, and this client happens to be a 24/7 acute care operation. And they are a steam system, it's a pre-war building, and they needed a lot of upgrades. And most projects, most companies that approached the project suggested either a complete new building to eliminate the steam system or a complete building refund. When you bring that to dollars, that becomes a transaction that nobody wants to touch. It's extremely expensive. When you look at the same exact building project with that integrated energy performance approach, and I mean you design and redesign throughout the process and you build it and guarantee it, now you're taking the entire risk and your goals are shared with your client. You're now working together for the same goal, as opposed to separate entities, I would say as an engineer, no, I would repipe it just for safety. And a contractor would say, no, I would build it N1+1 from an equipment standpoint to get the performance. We were able to build that project while it was operational. Retrofit that hospital to a hydronic system, and now give them what they did not have the capacity to do first, which is have 400 or 500, I don't remember the number correctly, kW cogeneration plant on the roof of the building because they didn't have space in the mechanical room. And then that allowed them to capture funding from NYSERDA and others, which then when it went out to the financial market, it looked like a completely different transaction. And it was able to be financed. And that project last year was nominated the AEE Project of the Year for engineering. And that's the philosophy that we're starting to see. Our real estate and corporate clients are looking for leaner ways to drive their goals at a lower cost to get the return on investment, to get the VP to give it a green light. Because when these projects come back and they're traditionally looked at a very high rate of return, they're not what they're looking for.
Interesting, and you mentioned the importance of off-balance sheet financing. And turning to John, one of the innovations that propelled energy financing forward is on-bill financing and other methodologies that create these situations. And you and Constellation have been leaders in this part of the industry. Talk to us about the utility role in energy efficiency financing and the things that you and Constellation are doing to help move these kind of projects forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So those that don't know, Constellation is the retail business unit of Exelon, which is a large utility and power plant company. And so it's interesting, we kind of sit on both sides of that. So you mentioned utility. I sit on the retail supplier side, but we also have the utility perspective on this as well. So I'll talk about the retail supplier side. So that space is principally selling electrons, to in deregulated electricity market, which is a very competitive business. As you can imagine, there's very little, there are almost perfect information out there. There's a lot of brokers and intermediaries. So for us as a commodity company, selling commodity contracts is a bit of a challenge. So a couple of years ago, we have thousands of customers that buy power from us. Many are in the commercial industrial space, and the financing options for them to implement projects were somewhat limited. They can either take out some sort of debt, but for a lighting retrofit or something mid-size, a lot of people don't want to incur that sort of expense, or they could use cash on hand. And so what we did was sort of paired up the expertise we had from the performance contracting business, which we also manage. And so we know how to do these projects. We know the savings that they generate. So how can we deliver these to our customers, and also as a retail supplier, differentiate our offering? So as Sempra, Suez, Direct Energy, they're also selling electrons. How can we make our electrons a little different? And so the product that I manage in New York, Efficiency Made Easy, is the result of that, which is it's as simple as it sounds. It's on-bill funding of energy efficiency projects. I think there are different ways to structure this that have different benefits to people, but ultimately it's a capital source for those that might not have any other strong options. I think on the utility side, though, you're seeing a lot more from regulators in terms of forcing utilities to be able, and you could probably comment on this better than I, but forcing utilities to offer this sort of a service. So in different states and different customer sizes, we're seeing that, which candidly is a competitor to what I offer, however, delivers the same sort of value. So that's kind of what we're doing, and I think that more are going to come into this space, but there's only a handful of larger suppliers, so to some extent we do have a differentiated product, but that's where we're at.
Interesting, and Ramsey, for those of us, like I'm in myself, who originally bloodied our nose in the municipal Article 9 type contracts, to see where this industry is to progress to today, and how third parties are stepping in to make these things happen. Not long ago, The Economist suggested that perhaps mankind's greatest creation was actually the financial contract, and how we go about using it to deal with risk in these types of situations, allowing transactions to move forward. And that's the part of the equation your company is addressing. So tell us what you're doing and how you're providing a third-party solution to a lot of these credit issues and other things that come up in these projects.
Yeah, Dan, if The Economist says it, it must be true, right? But in all sincerity, all we've done is look at the history of really any other consumer or investor asset class and noted that in every single one of them, insurance has played a major, major role in terms of getting consumers or companies to purchase assets and or allowing investors to underwrite them, securitize them in a turnkey way. So we just think if energy efficiency is going to become the consumer asset class where you can go into your bank, or you can go into an energy efficiency project development firm that has a storefront and actually buy something in a turnkey way because it makes sense to you as a consumer in the same way buying a car does, or buying a house does, or even buying a cell phone. That having some type of insurance option is it's necessary. So we've had this weird experience over the last couple of years where we spent a lot of time probably talking to a lot of the people actually in this room and saying, hey, why don't you include insurance in your offering? And the response has been, we're really focused on cost right now. Well, I can now kind of, sit here 3 years later and look back at the market and say, okay, how many deals have we done, right? How has it been going focusing on cost instead of focusing on getting consumers confident, getting them comfortable, and at least, getting some deals done. So I would say that, we're very confident in the history of what market development looks like, and insurance has always been key. So I would just say to everyone in this room that, don't forget the insurance side of the solution. Normally people think of insurance as a cost, something that's a pain, something that, might involve some type of litigation or dispute eventually. But the reality is that probably none of you would buy a car if a warranty wasn't at least offered. You might not take the warranty, but you'd certainly be suspect of buying an automobile that doesn't even make the offer. So that's our focus, is on just short-circuiting the sales process, short-circuiting the education process of getting consumers and investors comfortable by just showing, hey, there is a way to provide third-party investment-grade revenue guarantees for your projects.
Super. I'm going to open it up fairly shortly to the group, as I hope you're formulating some questions. Before I do that, I want to ask each of you, we've talked about the progress in the market, we've talked about it before, starting with Barry, tell us where we are today in terms of financing securitization, and particularly what's working, but also what more needs to be done, laws you'd like to see changed, ways you'd like to see government, maybe regulators get out of the way or help more, things like this. You're right, just some thoughts in terms of moving it forward.
Sure. I'm aware of one securitization of energy efficiency project right in pictures. And there may be a couple of other larger securitizations in the solar field. But the problem is one of standardization in size and experience. The rating agencies like to look for a lengthy 10-year period of time over which to value experience. That doesn't exist in the energy efficiency space yet. And also the documentation is fairly diverse, and so there really hasn't been standardized documentation. Some exists. I know NYSEG has worked in terms of some lease agreements that have been reviewed by a major Wall Street law firm and relatively standardized. So I think there's still a ways to go. You're also dealing with dollar size, very large number of smaller projects, to do boiler conversions that may run, $50, $100, $200,000, lighting fixtures again, $100 million, even cogeneration systems that might run $1 to $2 million. You need to assemble a large number of those in order to get the critical mass necessary to do securitizations. I think it may happen sooner, which is occurring in the consumer, what I call the consumer residential solar area, with which I'm not familiar with. But I was addressing more of the commercial side.
Right. Is the securitization you're referring to the Connecticut PACE securitization, or are you referring to something else?
No, the private was a private securitization.
So you turn it on, and next, same idea. What can we do to move forward? How can we optimize these transactions? What can we do to make things better? What kind of things would you like to see happen see the industry, the finance, and the governments, and the utilities all move together and make these things work more?
Well, again, I'll draw back from my past experiences and what I've seen within two different industries, if you would say, the more municipal government type projects and the commercial sector, and try to see how to capture the best advantages of both. And I'll tell you, within the past 3 or 4 years, the only the New York State government started mandating higher M&D protocols and guarantees on energy efficiency projects. And that only started happening after hundreds of millions of dollars of projects were built, and I won't say that they didn't materialize, but they didn't materialize in the sense that the industry should materialize. There is a lot of capabilities and expertise and engineering power and M&D power to make these projects actually materialize to what is securitized to begin with, but they weren't. And you started to see a push for higher levels of M&D guarantees and protocols to make these projects more apt to the financing market and to deliver the savings. What we would like to see happen is the energy efficiency transaction should not be looked as a measured transaction. When you're looking at a project like that, you're looking at it as an investment in an asset that is going to last for 10 to 15 years. But at the same time, you're making the investment today, so as an investment transaction, have it built so that it is optimized from a design standpoint. Have it built so that it's optimized cost-wise, and which will go against industry standard, which is build the project and price it at a cost structure. It's a timesheet management structure. We need a little bit of a culture shift, which is goal-oriented culture shift, results-driven. Make that net present value as a goal, and your energy company, your partner, whoever it may be, he's seeking that goal instead of developing a project and then presenting it and say, this is what you can buy. Instead, work backwards and allow engineering and allow, the AIA and Rocky Mountain Institute, they've been behind this for quite a time now, and the Department of Energy now started putting out papers and articles and sample projects about how these different mechanisms of integrating performance and contract and financing can deliver a much higher value to the industry. When I bring it to the private sector, this is what I hear from CEOs and VPs. I want the same exact result, but a higher dollar value. I want a better return on investment. And we would hope that we'd see more and more specialties in energy performance contracting and not a packaging type transaction, which doesn't really deliver the final result that a client might do.
It's moving us towards with the 30 years since Avery and 111 has come up with the idea of a megawatt. We're really truly seeing it become a currency. The utilities clearly have a role in that. More the retail side shows that. Do you see yourself being able to offer these kind of custom solutions to empower, if you will, the market to address these kind of unique solutions that are needed?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned integration, and I think sort of the next step that we're looking at right now is looking at not just energy savings, but also the environmental and capacity values for some of these reductions and monetizing them in the out years to fund these programs. So if you think about what a megawatt of demand response is worth in New York City, it's a tremendous dollar value. And you think about the systems you can install that can, contribute to that reduction, such that you can take those funds in the out years and sort of reinvest them in. So specifically, when we're looking at on-site generation and energy assets storage, Evan and I have actually spoken about some of these sorts of ideas, which is what we're getting into, is how do we look at not just energy savings and dollars and kilowatt hours, but also capacity values and using that as a revenue stream.
So, Randy, you and I were talking earlier about some of the unique transactions. You almost got into one in Puerto Rico, which fortunately you did pull back out of some of them, but the insurance, the aspects of this too are facing some challenges and some opportunities. So where do you see your part of this moving? What kind of things would you like to see that will allow you to do play a role?
Yeah, we've kind of gotten a little lazy, I should say, in a certain way, in that we've had some big successes recently where programs, origination programs or finance programs, be they PACE or be they kind of private market driven, have come in and said, you know what, every single deal that comes through us is going to present insurance as an option. So what we see is more of that, more kind of at the market design level, more at the programmatic level, even at the utility level, saying, okay, we want insurance to be part of it. So we think if you look at what's happening with the New York regulatory framework right now, be it REV or just the internal dialogue that's happening with the Green Bank or any of these entities, we see a very clear path to where kind of the market transformation will facilitate more of that required insurance or at least baked insurance. So yeah, we think the opportunity is really stepping back and focusing on market design.
So I'd like to open it up to the audience who are present and ask your thoughts, some questions that you have for the panel. Someone like to start us off? In the back there.
Good question. You guys talked about securitization, and that projects are being securitized, and that's a fantastic development. Who's on the other side of that transaction who's buying securitized projects or the tranches there?
I heard from someone anecdotally that every single green bond that they had seen come through their terminal with a proper QSIP had been oversubscribed by a factor of at least 10. I don't think there's been. I would be willing to put some real money down on the table to bet that there's never been a green bond that's gone to market that hasn't been oversubscribed at least a little. And there's some big institutional asset managers who actually have programs set up kind of in their social investment, social responsibility divisions that they'll say to you, hey, if you bring us a rated transaction of at least 10 million, 15 million, it could have an F rating, but as long as you can evidence that it's green, then we can actually bank that because that meets our philanthropic requirements, investment requirements.
A follow-up question. I forgive the ignorance. How many? Are there a lot of these green bonds out there?
Yeah, I think what's 75. We're in.
Well, green bonds is a much larger field than just energy efficiency securitization. But so I'm not sure if we have a size of the energy efficiency field. I don't know if there's. I know we have a green index now, but I don't know that we have a green energy efficiency. If anybody's been keeping track of these particular securitizations.
It's much broader than energy efficiency specifically. And to answer your question, maybe a little more specifically in terms of the buyers, you're looking at large institutional buyers, pension funds, and other firms that manage large institutional.
But for non-solar, for me at least, non-solar / kind of corporate yield codes, if you're looking at honest, dedicated energy efficiency project finance securitizations, the only two that I can point to are Connecticut through Cephia, and that's a PACE, and then also Hero in California, which is residential PACE. So you've had one $75 million, I think, AA commercial, residential PACE in California, and then you've had Connecticut to the tune of about 40 million, also investment grade in Connecticut PACE.
So in terms of some of these investors, and maybe a question over here, in terms of some of these investors, a lot of pressure on funds, particularly public funds, to get into social impact investing and a lot of the corporate social responsibility type investing. Are you seeing some additional interest in the market from folks who are looking for the sort of do-good investments as a result of these and some of the investments in energy efficiency, that they'd like to see more of these come to the market?
They are, but again, it's a question of size, critical mass, and establishment of ongoing operations that are rare.
I was just going to point out that there was a REIT that was recently done last year or so by a company called Hannon Armstrong. And they were able to move forward on the basis of energy efficiency projects that they had in place with the government, and that was the base upon which they were successful in creating the.
But the REIT portfolio is for the most part very large, kind of investment grade, historically project financeable energy performance contracts.
Yeah, I mean it takes a lot of money to undergo the process and then become a publicly traded entity. I mean you need to have some critical mass, otherwise the costs of undertaking a securitization or a reprocessing. It's just dwarf, you know, it's significant. So you have to have a big enough, I think, portfolio to justify.
No, and that's, if you look at the PACE programs that do have $300,000, $700,000, $200,000 projects within their securitizations, they are statewide programs for all kinds of purposes, right? With major infrastructure and marketing resources connected.
And Connecticut's case with the state legislature behind it, which doesn't hurt.
Right.
The market. Yes.
Well, at NICE, we have tried to work with organizations that have a platform that can identify projects. We created the Empire program with Fannie Mae, which is a green mortgage program, and we also created a program with Housing Development Corporation of New York City, which is a very large mortgage holder. Both of those instances, NICE provided credit enhancement to leverage our small little pool of capital to create a bigger means of outreach to the New York City marketplace in anticipation of these, outreach organizations bringing lots of projects in the fold. And, could they have in turn turn around and securitize that book of business? I think that was the intent, but the problem is it's a very competitive marketplace right now, and even though our programs were designed with our on-staff engineering and a full marketing package for the DUS lenders, for Fannie Mae, for example, the competition to lend for new mortgages as well as even doing seconds, you provide one extra step that a building has to undergo in terms of getting an escrow to audit, or even though we're attributing additional money through the mortgage than they would have gotten in the just doing a regular mortgage. It's really hard to get buildings to do this because they don't want to take the extra step. They just want to get the financing done. So we have struggled with getting the volume of products that we would like into these two big entities. The HDC program has a couple of programs, loans on the books with Franklin Plaza, which is a 14-building, 20-story buildings, $7 million projects. So we have these projects that are underway, but we have seen nowhere near the uptake that we would have liked. And it's all about the uptake, the speed, and the scale that would allow you to get securitization going.
And just so everybody who may not be as aware of the terms, an OSHRA 2 audit, the engineer himself to explain.
Okay. So ASHRA level engineering is it's a standard protocol, and that is a level of how do you audit your buildings and how deep you go in evaluating energy consumption, energy use, energy demand, and in turn the actual equipment that uses the energy in your facility. Just to give you a quick recap, that is the reason why there needs to be a change between how do we look at energy efficiency as a project and how we look at it as finance. Because if you do not marry the engineering and the quality of engineering and the level of depth of engineering you provide to then turn it into a contract to turn to security, then there's a gap. And how do you monetize that? Because when you install equipment in a building, the funding entity is not taking ownership of the asset. Is it taking ownership, depending on the type of financing, it might be taking a lien onto the building. Owners don't want that. How do you bridge that gap? And that's, I think, where a lot of the discussion is happening with all the different type of funding programs, including PACE or GSA or ESA, performance contracting as well, which is a municipal type bond structure. But then that ends up being, what we're seeing is somewhat of a gap between the fact that it's an engineering transaction. Meanwhile, we're looking at it only, or trying to focus on how to make it a financial mass transaction.
Well, exactly. That's why of our 11 employees, 2 of them are engineers. So we're passionate about making sure that the savings that are projected and are being underwritten to in our processes are verifiable, because otherwise you're not going to get paid back.
So in retrospect, our company is 200 employees and 60 or 70% are engineers, which is not typical for the escrow world. And that's why when clients ask us, are you an escrow? We have that discussion internally and we say, we are an energy services company, but we're not the escrow that the industry has gotten to know. Because there's a big difference between that model and actually designing and redesigning your projects to actually drive the lowest cost for your investor, which is a very different concept. It's actual performance of the energy efficiency transaction.
In my experience, 6 or 7 employees is large for that stuff. So, which may be one of the issues. Other questions, other comments, these are good. Yes, Liz?
I have a question for Ramsey, which is, it's not clear to me, since you didn't say, I would like to know, what are you actually insuring? Are you insuring the result, or are you just insuring the actual equipment that's installed? And how much, on a percentage basis, does that, what's the cost of the insurance on a percentage basis of the project?
Right, so we are actually insuring the result. And in that process, we are insuring the engineering, so the ASHRAE, or maybe even non-ASHRAE, because we aren't set, or the insurance market isn't set to a particular engineering methodology. We are insuring or wrapping the underlying warranties and equipment. And there are now insurance products that are in the market that are even insuring behavioral and weather and price fluctuations too. So we're rapidly moving to a place in the insurance market where we can really provide a true third-party wrap, true third-party, essentially revenue guarantee. And to that end, we've, if you look at the insurance market over just the last 12 months, it's gone from where there were 2 underwriters in the space to now being half a dozen in just 12 months. And to that end, there's now a lot of price competitiveness on the actual insurance cost side. Historically, though, the quoted prices have been, or where most premiums have been placed, is between a 2 and 5% cash flow discount. So if you had a project that was going to generate $1 million in savings, the end result is it generates $950,000 in investment grade insurance. But what we have found in several projects that we've worked on, non-investment grade ESCOs who've come to us and said, hey, look at this, and then even quasi-investment grade ESCOs who have provided guarantees in the past, is that the cost of the insurance provides for a much, much cheaper performance contract and guarantee, because you're now able to price that performance contract or that guarantee on the cost of the insurance instead of on the cost of your profit margins or on the cost of your financial liabilities or the cost of the premium. So we think it actually it has the potential to really speak to Ahmed's point about driving much more meaningful engineering and by extension much, much more material and price competitive guarantees.
So just as a follow-up, and how do you work, or how do you work in the idea that there is also an impact on basically the customer side, the end user side, of how their employees carry out use of the new equipment, and how do you address that?
Well, and that's the great thing about there now being a competitive insurance market, is it depends on what type of project you're doing. And this gets away from kind of the conventional selling a performance contract with specific technology, and now being able to look at a specific project and go, okay, this is very behaviorally sensitive. So if this is super behaviorally sensitive, then we need to know that we have a really good performance contract that addresses those behavioral disincentives or incentives underneath it. But if we have that, then yeah, we can, as long as everyone's sticking to that O&M plan, then yeah, we can get an insurance company to come in and indemnify that. But then the flip side is, now there are projects where you can say, okay, behavior can't do anything here. A lot of the deep stuff like, cogeneration, this is a ATM, this is a cash machine. No one, you have to get in and do something really stupid to not make money off of this. Then there are insurance products that come in, you don't even need the performance contract. It's not even a contractual indemnification policy, it's a first party, we will guarantee the performance, the revenue, the expectations.
Just to give you a quick note on that, one of our most complex projects was the Montreal Biodome. If anybody's familiar, it's a very large structure with, I can safely say, 180 different habitats requiring very complex environment and systems. And that was a performance contract that our company built after minimum 5 years of design implementation. Very much similar to what I studied at NYU at the JFK project, which was an 8-year design project with a 6 months construction. But the cost of that work was extremely limited to initial evaluation of the project. This Biodome project, we ended up paying 2 years of short savings on that project. So to your point, once you build a project, if you are designing it, and if you're building it, and you are monitoring its performance, it's your stake as much as your client to make it deliver on its savings. With that philosophy, we ended up having to re-engineer and retweak the M&D and protocols and operations of that project for 2 years running until it came up to contract. So from a transactional first step standpoint, there is a guarantee between the two entities, but then comes in the securitization and extra insurance and how to take these transactions, instead of being one, being hundreds and millions. And then when there's a difference of levels of engineering and guarantees, how do you get an umbrella contract so that you can walk in a store and buy a project with an insurance? The insurance is going to have to say, well, what's behind it?
We can only provide insurance if you do or have a developer who's able to do everything that Ahmed is talking about and Ahmed's firm is talking about. The irony is that our underwriting standards are actually higher than what conventional or historical ESCO performance contracting standards have been. Because we now are actually looking at the true M&D-based performance of this project. Stipulation, there's no reason for insurance.
That's a word nobody likes. Nobody likes that word anymore.
Right. Option A.
So does that then mean that you get involved also in the performance contracting aspect of the project?
Well, the goal here is not to have a performance contract, I should say, on the insurance side. We like projects where you don't need anyone to say, okay, this is how we will operate and so on and so forth, and if you don't do this, then this happens. We like projects where we can say, okay, this will generate this, and if there's any dispute, we just look at the sub-meter, or we just look at the option C report, and we come in and we find the arbitration. On behalf of the building owner, I should say. I mean, that's the other place where we found we have real value, even for the conventional ESCOs, is by getting rid of or getting away from the classic fox watching the henhouse problem that the ESCOs have had. It's, yes, I will still do your performance guarantee, and if you don't trust me, I can give you recourse to a third party.
Good questions. More discussion? Yes, in the back.
In terms of monitoring and verification, I'm interested, have there been any sort of standardization or any improvements in metering and such? Is there sort of a standard metering schema that people are using these days to make this, to verify on the back end?
That's you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it seems like the next generation of building improvements is sort of greater metering, greater information gathering in the building. What I'll say is all this stuff comes at a cost, and so to the extent these systems, you're talking about stipulation, I don't know, is lighting okay to stipulate? I think it is. I mean, we produce wattages, it's pretty well set, on the savings. So is metering that level going to add the value that, that's sort of the cost? But certainly for more complex stuff, yeah. And I don't know, I feel like every time I go to like a New York City startup event, there's another company that's doing, little devices here and here and here and here. And for $29.99 a month, you can get your report as to how everything's working. And so that definitely seems like the way the industry is going.
Discussion. One of the questions I have for you, Randy, you mentioned how, and I know very little about insurance. So when you talk about wrapping around the underlying warranties of the equipment, and in effect taking out the risk of worrying about the equipment, and frankly, putting worryiness of the equipment providers when a lot of this equipment is from startups. Explain how you're dealing with that, maybe how some of the others are dealing with that as well, when you come to the engineering side.
Yeah, I mean, we had one of the two largest energy performance contract investment banks in the country. That have been doing this, they've been doing this for 30 years, they've done billions and billions of dollars of EPC private placements before. And what they got the most excited about the insurance was that it actually did indeed cover the underlying equipment. that was something that they found to be truly innovative because now you do have that grant. So that's an anecdote that I would say kind of points to it is important to have someone who isn't the ESCO/developer and isn't the technology provider, because you're never going to have a situation where the technology provider is going to come in and say, yeah, I will insure and guarantee the developer's engineering and work, and then vice versa. So you need that third party to come in and do both at the same time. So that's something that insurance allows for. And then looking at the market real long term, I kind of have a running joke with a gentleman that we know very well who works for one of the old monoline insurance companies, a bond insurer, that he will be environmental finances man of the year in 2027, right? And, that's where we're eventually going. And how does he get to enter this market? He only gets to enter this market if on the distributed asset side of things and all those little projects, there is that standardization, but by extension, there's that insurance standardization that he can look at and then wrap at the essentially macro.
What's interesting about that question too, so I work a lot with the Port Authority at managing their performance contract vehicle in New York, and so we're doing tens of millions of dollars with these guys, and there's a company called Sensity, which is making these smart LED fixtures. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that, but it's basically using the driver and an LED light to act as a power source for cameras, license plate technology. They have a couple of these in the Newark Airport in Terminal B, which can literally read a newspaper on somebody's lap on a bench across the terminal. So really cool stuff. And they said, so we're doing projects on bridges, tunnels, and things like that. So you put these on the GW Bridge, put these here and there. Well, as you can imagine, the GW Bridge, that is like the most intense environment for a light fixture that was ever created. I mean, just soot and snow and salt. And the Sensity company, well-intentioned, but they're not in the business of lighting, they're in the business of technology. So they said, we can't stand behind this solution. So what we've done is had our lighting contractor partner with Stanley Security, who's providing the camera and all these things, to develop an integrated warranty program so that this thing is going to hold up for a determined period. Again, going back, what's the cost of that? It's substantial. And these cameras are 15 grand, the light fixture's $1,000. Changing a light at the GW Bridge is not cheap. So
there's a special union just for that.
That's a whole other panel about working at a GW Bridge. So it's kind of an interesting world. All these technologies are bringing up for implementing.
Let me ask you this. One of the things that's emerging from the LEED space, particularly the most recent creation of the LEED and really pushes, is the idea of, did a building that got a LEED certification, including energy as part of that, actually work the way we thought it would? And that is obviously a question that gets very much into the energy efficiency field, because it's all based on saving. Has your firm been called on or to come back through and see, wait a minute, things didn't really work out? Was it tenant behavior? Was it the fact the systems maybe weren't dealing with a power plant in West Virginia that went bankrupt because the Chinese boilers did not produce the BTUs that they were supposed to? Where are we in the after the follow-up and the monitoring stage for these things that, if you will?
Sure. Typically, in all of our transactions, we have a relationship with this entity or this client for a long term, for 10, 15 years. Most of the time, our clients, after achieving their results 2 and 3 and 4 years down the road, they part from that financial agreement. Now, when you're looking at LEED projects that are maintaining their accreditation, we have had situations where we had to go back and work with building operations teams to bring it back to its standard of where it had changed. And most of the time, you gotta remember, when you're making energy efficiency investments, year 5 and 6, you have changes in personnel, you have changes in user environment, you have changes in density. You have so many factors that affect the building. You can't look at it as a system, you look at it as a human being, and everything changes all the time. So yes, part of our guaranteed and option C, M&V approach and relationship that we have, if you will, with our project, is to maintain it. So every project we have where there's a power plant or a CHP system, we monitor the actual daily performance, we get performance reviews on it, we get trending. And then when we reevaluate the LEED certification every year, this is the actual data we use. So it's less happening that we are going back to fix things, only because it's a continuous process. It's not a spot level review.
And Barry, are you seeing investors be more comfortable with the marketplace? That they will in fact use shared these savings that are proposed, or how does the investment world, the person who's ponying up the money?
No, the regulators are all over the banks, and the banks are just very reluctant to take any risks. They want everything guaranteed.
We have a ways to go.
There's room for guys like us to take some risk.
Other questions, comments? Quiet day. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
It's kind of a specific question, but when you're developing financial models to justify an investment in, say, a lighting upgrade, what is the time horizon that you can claim savings? So if there's a 5-year payback from year 5 to when can you claim savings? At what point is the lighting no longer generating savings or something new on the market?
I can answer that. Lighting retrofits are pretty quick. They'll, on a simple basis, they'll pay back 2 or 3 years. So we'll offer a 5-year financing plan, so that will enable the building to start saving money from day one. So there'll be a spread, and at the end of 5 years, we'll have gotten our money back, and 100% of the savings goes on to the building.
I think you just consider the useful life and the replacement costs in your analysis. I think the challenge with some of these lighting technologies is that, when you look at the cost was for an LED 5 years ago, what it is now, 5 years out, if you're doing a job right now, how much of that replacement is going to cost when the warranty is up? And then is the warranty, is the light going to last for 10 years with the warranty's on? So it's tough. But yeah, I think generally just look to the replacement costs.
I think to add to your question, we're looking at it, let's say, as a lighting or a measure, right? But when you are doing an energy project, that's not just a measure at this point, which is more of an intricate deep building system. Well, do you base the guarantee based on the life of the equipment separately, each separate equipment, or is there a different aspect when you put them together and it becomes an intricate system, and you have a lot more pieces of equipment involved that takes into operational parameters and not just the equipment as a standalone? Then for how long do you take on energy guarantees? And that's another question that's always asked. You could look at a boiler and say 30 years, but if I could put it in a very rigorous type operation, it might have a shorter lifespan. And that's where engineering comes into play, so that you can drive the highest value of these products, as opposed to just a standard standalone approach, looking at it from a perspective of, this is what the book says, it's 10 years, it's 9 years. So yeah, it's a very good question, and it differs quite a bit.
I'm interested in battery storage, and as I guess utilities need to sort of different pricing based on types of use. I don't know if that's sort of in the mix of traditional energy efficiency equipment, but how do you see that coming into play and those types of installations being insurable or financed?
Rapidly. And in fact, the energy storage, DRM, these are all part of integrated solutions that are being addressed by the larger property owners and the industry. One of you want to talk about that?
Ellen, I think the important thing is who's taking the position on what the value is of that capacity reduction in the out years. So one of the things I think which enables us to do that is because we're a power plant company. So we have a position naturally, and we're comfortable with the risk on long-term valuations of where the markets are at. So the value of that battery is you flip it on in the afternoon, and then you charge it up at night, and that reduces your peak load. So we have a group that's just doing lots of those projects now: storage, batteries, cogeneration. I think that's where the market is going for Constellation, because one, customers want it to. There's a great financial incentive for it. And,
what are the batteries there right now?
I think, yeah, I'm not from, I mean, other people might be, but I think that's still what we're using.
Very the one usage. The CalMac folks have an ice-based storage system, which serves different purposes. So depending on the purpose, they have different technologies. And one of the problems is particularly New York City, the building codes. Typically for slate lithium.
The fire department has regulations that will only allow certain kinds of batteries in buildings.
It's all being treated on a case-by-case basis now, but DOB and FDNY are coordinating pretty closely to determine which technologies can be fast-tracked and streamlined. To give a little more color into that, while we
mix the code guy on that.
Yeah, so Con Ed is really serious for the New York market about battery storage. They think it's really the future when it comes to the level of their grid anticipation in 2016. We actually have a joint venture between the state, Con Ed, and Agrion. It's called Grid Market. It's been talked about a little bit here, but basically what we're doing is going through the Con Ed portfolio to determine which Class A commercial buildings, which residential properties, we're basically mass qualifying them for storage. And that's going to hopefully really allow us to accelerate this market. And what we're doing is talking to some financial entities to provide some major backing, so we can really, we have the end users, we can pinpoint who's the best fit, and work with financial partners to deploy as needed. So, people looking to finance, stuff like that, we want to basically aggregate this pool because we have developers network, we have the marketplace assembled.
And I think on October 7th, you're having an Agrion roundtable like this, just on energy storage. So give a promo for that if you're interested in that.
Can you share? We see this as a
yeah, it'd be great if they made it really easy to get 3% investment tax credit in Congress, and I think it could be.
Well, and the credits in New York are already so.
I always give the word "made it easy" in Congress.
I think a lot of people are seeing this as the solar finance model.
Third-party ownership.
And that's really being aggressively pursued now. Who knows, we're probably a year too early, but we really have to get all these things in by 2016. And that means organizations that want to own it now need to budget for it yesterday.
What is the most common storage? Is it an 4-hour or 6-hour battery, or a year's battery, or what?
I mean, in terms of the most common, it's tough to say because we only have
the largest pump storage hydro facility. The most
common is lead acid for backup.
That's cheapest, but a lot of manufacturers with a variety of technologies are trying to play in these markets, and you're going to see companies like Tesla that are really just they're already the cheapest battery out there. They're going to drive down the cost even more. They're going to flood the market,
But this is a very important point that you mentioned, and also gets us back to all parts of the energy efficiency. The fact that the codes department, which we're working with the international IEC and the fire department here in New York has their own deal with things, but even getting the International Code Organization on board for the next set of energy code to deal with how do we safely put lithium-ion batteries and other flammable materials into hospitals, for example, and others, and how we deal with those codes is a good example of sort of the regulatory aspects that are involved in this. And I know that each of you feel that as you look at the individual products, it's great things. But let's talk about some of this in terms of, let's say you have an integrated solution and you're now going to insure it or help finance it for 10, 15 years or periods of time. These facilities degrade. One of the real problems with fuel cells is nobody knows how they're going to degrade. We're still learning. How is the market dealing with the life of these assets and that performance over the life of the energy efficiency concepts?
Carefully.
Yeah, I mean, the big Bridgeport fuel cell project was insured. That was the only way that got done.
So, and that answers the question when you're talking about very new advanced technologies.
How do you insure?
How do you insure that?
With the energy storage stuff.
Look at
Not the lead
CHP.
battery, but the newer, more environmentally friendly ones. How do you insure something like that?
Well, readily. I mean, we are very much looking for storage partners at the moment to stand behind so that they can participate in some type of guaranteed storage as a service program. That's got to be the goal. Get out there. If you're a storage company right now, our advice to you would be, first of all, talk to Nick as much as possible, and then B, get a third-party insurance policy behind you so that whatever financial model you end up plugging and playing with, you've got that guarantee option to enhance it.
Also just to say, like on the hospital end of things, it's not only the things that have already been mentioned, but the hospitals have their own, there's additional layer of hospital regulation. I represent hospitals, I represent a lot of hospitals, and over time, and there, that makes it even more complex, and it's very concerning to the CEOs of hospitals, what they're gonna have to deal with. I mean, Cogen has even been, there are more and more hospitals moving to that, but it's been a big issue in hospitals because of the concern at the board of director level about what happens if my plant goes down.
But isn't energy a relatively very small component of a hospital?
Oh my God, no,
it's large?
No,
I thought it was small.
energy is the single largest cost after labor in a hospital.
Think about it.
It's extremely, you have to understand, yeah, I mean, the necessity, that's exactly it. The backup requirement.
No,
Actually, in New Jersey, the governor and I are close friends, but the governor has his energy resiliency bank that he's doing. Here, because of Sandy, he finally learned that you need to combine heat and power, and so the resiliency bank, wastewater treatment plants, water treatment plants, hospitals.
Maybe they should do gas stations too, after what I went through.
Yes.
I remember when I go and they were carrying people in stretchers down the stairs.
Right.
So, kind of make sure that doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example of what happens when you put the fuel, you put the generators higher up, you put the fuel where the water is, and
that's a big fire code issue now they're working on. It's basically flood zone regulation, so we're with these things.
With these things, there's a great story about the nuclear plant in Japan. The scientists figured out that the wave that would hit this plant would not be any greater than 40 feet. So they built a 40-foot wall. And they didn't think about the earth moving up 6 feet with the earthquake causing the wave. And so the wave came up with the wall. Other questions, we have some folks who are involved in the banking side and the valuation side. Some of the things you're seeing, some of the questions you have as you look at this industry.
Yes, well, we talk to clients and investors, we're clearly thinking about how am I going to protect the investment duration, and they're thinking that the insurance is one model. So what's the technology solutions that actively manage the energy performance of the building? And it's not just about behavior change, it's also being able to report on changes in usage, weather, weight, tenant impact analysis and protocol. More importantly, how do we avoid drift? And it's not just that the equipment broken, you can have a warranty repair, there's lots of things that cause drift. Just how things are maintained, how they're run, how they're set. And that all sort of raises the complexity level to a very high quotient, which is driving a lot of people away from when they integrate design complex projects. So we spend a lot of time talking to the software players and software as a service players who can deliver integrated solutions that basically keep score in the building, continuously commission the building, and give you the intel to go action those faults to take down the drift and figuring out a contract behind that. What are you guys seeing in your businesses that take that for the deeper retrofits?
Cool. To precisely speak to that point, that is exactly why we're seeing a major shift, especially when it comes to the private sector. That is what they're looking for. High level of M&D, high level of commissioning and retro commissioning throughout the term of the project instead of a one-time development installation and then hands off. Especially because the investment is made today, but it's a long-term investment. So internally as a company, we were fortunate enough to be able to, over the years, develop our own software and protocol, and we do very rigorously, actually. At any point of the day, an entire team or division that has to, on a daily basis, look at all the different power plants that were built in different areas and gather meter data, because that is the document, and that is the M&D protocol, and that is the reporting mechanism that goes back to the management team at the client end. And quite frankly, on a quarterly basis, there is engineering meetings between our team and our clients to verify different changes within the building that you could actually now see in the portfolio of energy used in the building. There's a lot of companies today now that have deployed software systems that either tap into the master meters or sub-metering systems, and then they run their own regressions to verify or take into account different variables that they agree on or based on different models. But at the end of the day, if you don't have that, you can't really have a complex, deep energy retrofit project and look at it as an investment. So to your point, it's bringing those two parties together between the complexity of the verification of these projects and the appetite to finance them on a regular basis and securitize them and become a secured investment from a financing standpoint. There's been a lot of software development. There's been a lot of new protocols to how to manage energy, how to report on energy. But where's the standardization? That's the key, because I might take different variances on weather, on occupancy, on density, depending on a different type of building than another software.
I think the most telling thing that's happened in our industry to that end, and that it doesn't get anywhere near enough press, is that Google and Apple are now competing over that standardization as it relates to controls. That's what we should be talking about all the time.
One of the things that's interesting to me as we listen to this conversation is what I'm hearing is that the ESCO of the future is an energy efficient, alternative energy providing, storage providing, all around engineering firm that's going to come in with integrated solutions. And that the true ESCO of the future that's coming into property sites and property management or university campuses is really going to be one that has to provide all these elements of the solution.
Yeah.
Say that's the trend?
And the utilities aren't gonna like that.
Well, utilities don't like that. It's one of the interesting aspects to me.
And that's part of it slowing it down, so you need to get the politicians and regulators to,
Well, what's your thoughts on the PJM, which is now being asked to change the rules on DRM, and the one, that's where you live. NISO is, of course, owned by the utility, so it's a little more utility friendly allegedly.
Actually, PJM is probably the most utility friendly, and while I think it's the best run system in the world, I've fought with them for 12 years now on their governance structure. It was created just to share transmission and all that. The members are the generators, people other than the generators, the transmission owners, the ones who have something to lose in the mix. We've gotten this space pushed really hard. It was about 4 or 5 years of demand response and energy efficiency and find it there to the market. That was fought by the members. The board is selected by the members. I have been very public, and I get along well with these guys, but they understand that I think the governance structure is not good. New York's a little bit different, same thing as California. It's one state. The governors have a lot to say about what goes on in that ISO. So with Richard Kaufman and Audrey and what they want to do, and a governor who will take them prisoners, I think New York has a lot of potential. I'm very hopeful about New York.
Do you think that, since we are talking about on the larger scale here, that FERC is going to have a role to make a lot of this come about in terms of the large scale, or have you not really seen?
The nice people at FERC, they, my own personal position, and I'm not an official anymore, is that FERC is too much controlled by the transmission companies. They give FERC candy, they get a very high return on transmission that is ridiculous. And I think they're too much, they're very well meaning, but they don't get reality. I mean, Willenhall got it, unfortunately he's right. And so I don't think FERC is going to fight the board. There's some staff people there who I think get it, but the commissioners have to be able to. Don't quote me on that.
Of course, you're an ex-official now.
Right.
Other comments, talk, discussion points.
Sure. So you had mentioned software and just to bring it back, because I think this is exciting too. There are cloud-based solutions that are coming out with very easily installable, cheap devices, and you're basically moving data up to the cloud. And we're doing a demo project right now with this organization called Energy Metrics. They basically went and did all of eBay's work, and they're measuring basically down to kilowatts per transaction level energy data. It's pretty impressive, but what they did is, we've got this project going on with Brooklyn Army Terminal in DC right now. They've got PD connected batteries, and we are launching this dashboard this week, and it's basically by the second data being tracked and uploaded and publicly shown. It's that performance data right there, publicly beamed up, analyzed on the cloud, basically telling them what opportunities they're missing by not discharging their batteries at certain times. So the software is developing, whether it's proprietary and in-house, whether it's a big dog like Google or something doing it, or whether it's a small firm that comes in with a cheap device that's like a cheap device that's hooking up to their EMS, analyzing or communicating with a lot of their infrastructure and then beaming it up. But I think there's a lot of progress going on in this right now.
I mean, wireless sensor technology and big data have made it easy to get all this information.
Yep.
The real question is, what are the faults of algorithms? And is that going to be a closed wall garden approach, or is that going to be a open source lineage model, where everyone's basically driving to the best algorithm and that's going to leverage the market? There's not a lot of sort of structure in that right now. There's a lot of courses in it.
I think the future has to be more of the open Linux space. I think you have a lot of the systems that come in and lock you into, they've got their proprietary algorithms, proprietary models, and it locks you into particular manufacturers too.
So the next level of the game is not just identifying faults. Just like with all these things, you need an intelligent consumer of the information. So it's not just a software play, it's actually a services play. You actually need an engineer who can interrogate the data, talk to the building engineer, figure out that data, what's going on here, interpret the information, and then take action. And that's an offering that's really just what you do.
So what do you think, let's talk about, because we've been talking about these kind of things and new protocols and standardization. Who should be taking the lead? So in New York, we clearly have the commission taking the lead with RED. Other states have different views. Some states actually have elected commissioners like Arizona. And so who should be taking the lead in bringing the standardization back and opening up these protocols? Should it be government? Should it be the private sector? A combination? Thoughts?
Private sector. DVDs versus VHS, right? I mean,
that was a market determination.
Right, that's what I mean, but that's, yeah.
The government's gonna have to go with the customer, and we were just whispering back and forth, I've been saying for years now, the utilities have to put their eggs into the non-regulated basket. Because the regulated basket is going away. Customers, what it is, Department of Defense is doing microgrids for how long now? That's their thing. They know that the bad guys have accessed everything. They have. Customers are understanding that corporation, so they're going to be setting up their own microgrids, their own systems. Utilities have to figure out another way to make money, which won't be, it'll be a holding company, it won't be the utility. And I think the general Google, I mean, those outside, customers are going with that. It's happening, and the government isn't going to stop it, and the utility industry isn't going to stop it. On the other hand, you need the government, the regulators, to actually allow it to happen, whether it's a fire code or whether it's setting standards. I mean, the standard setting, there's some voluntary stuff, but you're right on that the standard setting has to catch up, and it's not.
We want to get there before our utilities look like RWE and Eon in terms of their balance sheets. Yeah.
Well, I mean, also, I think, this is what I was, this is what Jane and I were talking about, but Verizon has already largely, they saw the handwriting on the wall a number of years ago, and they have moved, and they're pushing to move a lot of the services that were formerly regulated into the unregulated side. And we're seeing that with some of the utilities as well, and I think that that's something that actually has to happen. But I will also say that the utilities have been, and I'm talking about going back even decades, brilliant about working the regulatory side and the standards. And we kind of wanted to oppose cogeneration, and they weren't able to do it. I mean, I got in their way on the backup service rates going back to like 1980. So one of the things that they did is they went to the city and they made sure that they went to the environmental side of the city and made sure that they opposed, that there were individual customers who had cogen could only emit a certain amount of emissions, and that put the chill on developing CHP in New York City. So I think what's going to have to happen is almost the reverse of that. But it's not going to be the utilities who are going to do it. So there has to be some other coalition that's going to happen.
Let's be fair to the utilities, though. For example, in the REV, the last set of interveners were the Consumer Protection Group and the environmentalists, who all came in and said, no, you people are crazy. Clearly, we should tear up the DPS document and start over because you fools didn't start with us. And the consumer groups, frankly, are very much status. They are not. And if you go back to the California deregulation, why did the companies go bankrupt? Because the rule said you couldn't raise residential rates. So, so how do we? And this is sort of our final thoughts as we wrap up here today. How do we move this market forward? Do we need sort of a standardization trade group? Do we need Agrion to take the lead and Nick to lead the banner with the carry the flag into the areas? How do we move this forward? Some thoughts of the panel and others, how we move forward?
Well, I think the REV program that has been put together, I think is good. They've got 6 to 8 subgroups that are addressing demand response, and that's one of the problems with the utilities' financial balance sheet and income statement is the way they charge for demand response. It adversely impacts the ability to put in projects. So I think the REV movement is going to hopefully make some productive changes.
I'm going to give you the final thought. We're just about to wrap up on time. I think we're at about 11:30, so I'll give you the final thought.
I can summarize what you're asking in an actual real-life discussion between VP of Commercial Real Estate holding company here in New York City and our management. And that was very simply based on a project that they were pursuing on several of their buildings that wanted to take advantage of shifting energy from oil fuel to natural gas. And they could have gone many routes that are a more traditional approach, and then he was asked, why did you take an integrated energy performance contract approach for this type of transaction? He said, I'm dealing with an entity that will have to be credible to design my building, to work with my management and maintenance team and operations team, which gets forgot a lot. These are the people that actually know the historic use of their building, the historic trend, and what's needed future-wise. They know what manpower and resources they have. And you're taking on the actual investment guarantee and performance guarantee. If that continues to happen and you find intelligent customers that want that type of transaction, coupled with companies that can provide that transaction, you will see companies in an open source platform that will start developing the right type of M&V software, and that will become a more mainstream. As long as it's open and not proprietary, this will improve, and it will allow the industry to become more nimble, to become more accurate, and there might as well be more than one M&V platform, and clients intelligently will be able to choose which methodologies they want to approach. It doesn't have to be one set in stone, but it has to combine engineering, it has to combine the investment, intellectual investment and financing folks, as well as the companies that engineer and build these products.
Well said. Well, I think this is fascinating. I have to tell you, I think that you have to really go back to the formation of General Electric and Tesla fighting against Edison to find a more interesting time to be in the energy industry, which I know probably doesn't necessarily settle our financiers and our bankers' stomachs well, but it did work out for J.P. Morgan, who of course supported both Tesla and Edison. So on behalf of Agrion, I thank you all for being here. This is a great discussion. Check the Agrion websites. I know as I mentioned, October 7th on energy grid, energy storage, and other events. And I thank you all for your participation today.
Thank you.